Welcome everyone to another AllilON Raw. This session is going to be dedicated to line graduation and layering. Myself, Pedro, Kate and Jonathan, and we also have Johnny with us today as well.
Hey everybody.
So what we want to do, like in previous Raws, is we want to discuss the history of this language. So I think Johnny goes back the furthest in history, so maybe you'll be a good starting point. At what point in your career, or did you start using from the beginning of your career, line graduation and layers? Was it always
Okay,
there?
so at the beginning, line didn't exist. It was one length graduation and layering.
One length?
One length, yeah. So, I mean, I've been lucky enough to be in the industry for about 25, 26 years now.
So you're counting the barbershop days, is that what you're doing?
Yeah, roughly, yeah. I love that, I love barbershop. But keep it on track with the conversation. One length was a major influence when I was training, because when I was training there was a pattern of how you learn. You'd have to learn your one lengths first, then you'd go into your layering, then you'd go into your graduation. And I'm going to stop banging the table. I've been told to prior this to stop banging the table. So
very Greek.
It's like this, you know. So one length was a thing. So let's discuss that. From day one, Ped, I was being trained to see shape or see haircuts, and this haircut, for example, would be a one length, and this haircut would be a layered haircut, and this haircut would be a graduated haircut. Even though there was haircuts that were classed as a graduated haircut, but it had elements of layering to it, which was where all the contradictions happened at the beginning.
And there was a lot of named haircuts through our training as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, is it a bad thing? I don't know. Like I said, I could reel off 50 haircuts, the names of them, and tell you exactly how they were cut by
the
that
section
specific
pattern,
who cut them,
choice of
when they were
length.
cut.
Yeah. So I think going back to that method of education, I think it was what only existed back then. Would you say?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of education companies globally were producing videos, producing books, producing haircuts with names, and saying, "Come guys, you know, on this course you're going to learn these haircuts in their names," which was great at the time. It's how we learned. It's how me and you learned.
Yeah, you got to remember back when we first started Peds. You'd have different companies who would completely contradict each other, just out of principle. So they were different, they'd contradict each other completely. So anything this company was saying, this company would say the complete opposite. So there was a difference between them.
But a lot of them had named haircuts.
Yeah, most of them.
But I have a question. How did you relate, because we spoke about the shapes in the previous video.
Raw, yeah.
So how did the shapes relate to the techniques? Were they completely separate, or was it like, okay, I'm cutting something square, so that must mean that I'm creating layering? I'm using a layering technique.
Honestly, I mean, my memory is not the best, but if I go back to the beginning of my career, I wouldn't say that these shapes, square, round, and triangular, was used in an internal thought process at the beginning. It may have been used for an external process, like a one length back then, or what we call a line now. We would maybe say a square line, a round line, and a triangular line. Or maybe we didn't use the word triangular. It's a line. I remember using a line.
Right at the beginning. Right at the beginning, it was just named haircuts.
Yeah.
And that's what you learn.
Yeah.
And then the evolution from that, okay, well, those haircuts have specific shapes, and then the shapes started to get introduced.
Really? And did we go into shape, do you think?
Towards the end.
Oh, no, but not at the beginning stage.
No. It was
like, this is the name of the haircut, this is the section pattern, this is the choice of length.
That was it. Learn the shake. And it was being able to have a menu of haircuts that enabled you to a certain degree. If Sarah come and sat down, Sarah would have one of the 20 haircuts, and if Paul come in, he'd have 5 haircuts to choose from. And again, it was amazing because I'm slapping the table again.
I'm doing this. Can you tell?
Okay, so moving on, let's go middle. So that was the beginning. So the middle was probably when you guys came into the scene.
Yeah, which I was just about to say actually, because I remember when you used to teach me, you would refer to the technique, or what was considered a technique at the time, line graduation layering, and it would be focused very much on the shape.
Completely.
Not how the hair sat at natural fall.
So we're going back.
Away,
Expanded
expanded.
15
Not just
years,
that.
15 years,
15 years
15
ago.
years
15
ago.
years
Do you remember
ago.
models used to come in for your training days, and you'd have to cut a graduated bob.
Square layer, like.
Yeah.
But
Whatever,
in my
yeah.
training, it was square
Square
layer,
layer,
round
round
layer,
grad.
And then you'd have to, and then forget the head shape, forget the indentation, forget all of that discussion. It was like, this girl has to have a graduated bob, because you've got to pass a graduated bob.
You've got to find 11 models for your classic test, and one of them needs to be a graduated bob, the other one needs to be a line, the other one needs to be a BC, the other one needs to be...
So when you were taught the square layer, and then how you thought about it back then, and how you think about it now, like what's changed?
Well, yeah, because we could say, okay, we're going to move how have we moved forward ourselves as a company? So, for me, the biggest thing was when we were getting taught was that I had to draw everything. So, right from an early age, you taught me how to draw head sheets. So, head sheets made sense to me because of my background in studying subjects. So then I would draw
Architecture.
I would draw everything on a head sheet. I would sit there and I'd draw them all, and then he'd come in and he'd crease the paper, and then it'd be like, do it again, do it again, do it again, and again, put them in clear folder. Anyway, and so for me, then I looked and started to break everything down in my own mind again in like 5, 6, 7 years ago when I started again. So I relearnt the language, relearnt the lectures, and again we were talking about circles, squares and triangles and line graduation line. And then for me it was just all about, okay, I need more, I need to be better. How can I irritate Johnny and Peg as much as possible by having debates, by coming in and by arguing about doing this, about doing that, and I'd go away, and some nights it would be really bad and we'd have a really bad argument, and then I'd come in and I'd go, you know what, John, I thought about it, you're right. How can we go and move forward?
Look at you! I know where you're going. I know where it's going.
So anyway, so then
Can we do this with this? Because we mentioned one length before. Let's talk about how the line and the one length had a connection.
hang on 1 second. Let me finish the question. So
Stop controlling.
yeah. So it was like, okay, how can I break, or how can we distinguish what's happening? Because graduation was used to build weight, or increased in length externally, got longer internally, and then it was like, okay, well, this came about, didn't it? It was like, okay, these areas were then smudged it. Sorry. These areas here on the head were increasing in length vertically. So the square on the vertical, I didn't know if that existed or whatever. So then it was like, okay, well...
So based upon our language that existed, which was layering, was removal of weight, that was a contradictory part of it.
Yeah, and even in the lecture, and people are going to know about the primary shape lecture, we had an area which was about corners. And then corners was created to compensate for the roundness of the head, and they built weight within the haircut, or they built length within the haircut. And then I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, in the layered section I've got a square vertical shape, and that's telling me that it's removing weight. And then you think, okay, well, what areas?
So that was the
head
grey.
shape? That was the grey.
That area and that area.
Yeah.
There.
Okay.
And that area there.
So how basically it increased in length vertically, which then produced...
So this is a great explanation of why, if we go back to the previous rule, why we try to avoid using shapes. Yeah. And also why, now that we're going to come on to discuss, is that why we try to look at these techniques, which we previously called them, and now what do we call them? Because Kate and Jonathan was a big part of getting me and Johnny to see this from a different perspective, because this used to be the line, graduation and layer, and the square, round and triangle used to be at the first 2 pages of our lecture, wasn't it?
At the forefront of it, basically.
Yeah, it was like, this is it. You know, when you cut hair, you either do a
circle as well.
Yeah, you do a technique, you choose your technique, and then you choose your shape.
Or you choose your shape.
Or you choose your shapes.
And then
you
discuss
you
which
can
part
have
of the shape becomes layer and which part becomes graduation.
You know, you can have a combination of all of these. You can have the graduation and layer, you can have some of it and all mixed and matched together. So at what point did you two decide that this shouldn't be at the forefront?
When we realised they're not, it wasn't a technique. A technique is a method of working to create something. It's something that you do and you use, whereas the line, graduation and layer was always the finished result.
Well, that was the first movement.
Yeah, that
We
was the
moved
first.
technique to results because you was really,
Yeah.
and we was a
It's
big
like
part.
that Kate and Jonathan came to us and said, you know, this subject in our lecture that's called techniques, it's no longer going to be called techniques, it's going to be called results, and it's going to be put to the back of our a PowerPoint presentation or removed completely. Me and Johnny was like,
What?
You mad?
what are you doing that for?
But it was
You guys been drinking?
it was only when we was allowed to go away together and deliver the lecture together that we were delivering it, investigating it. But while we were delivering it, we were like not crying inside, but crying inside because it was kind of like, okay, well, we've now analysed it now to a point where some of the stuff is really contradicting each other, and we got to a point where honestly we probably didn't believe it anymore, and we started to lose the enthusiasm that we once had to then present the lecture.
So can we just make this very clear? So in what we considered to be a square layer, what we identified was that from the occipital bone above, actually, because you're building weight,
Increasing
in length.
yeah,
which is
that's
the
what
new
we're talking about
language.
now, but
Yeah.
back in those
Yeah,
days,
yeah.
Because you're building
graduation was a build up of length and weight. So in this scenario, you are building length and weight. So would this then class this area here, like Jonathan's drawn, would this now be graduation? Well, how can it be graduation if graduation is a bit of length and weight, and then be layering as well? I can't bang the table, I'm sorry.
So but I've got. Can I lead?
Yeah, go for it.
And this is one of the things that I see again, and I had to do this haircut myself, was a square shape, square layer, pure. But you didn't take into consideration at all the length. So it was a long square layer.
Do you remember when you do you remember for your test you used to do like a square layer and it looked like just a hat, like a hug.
But it's kind of like, okay, at what point are these lengths, where are those lengths actually going to sit?
What's the purpose of
What's the purpose
Well,
of
I
those
used to
lengths?
point the hell out of the corner because I
Just get
didn't
rid of
need it, and
Just get rid of
then
them.
it was.
And it was like, okay, or it was masculine if you had a square shape, because if masculine and feminine was also
big part
okay.
of
So
it.
if you're a man, you've got to have a square shape. So not taking into consideration
Their
no
head shape.
no density or anything like that. And then if you're a woman, you had no corners because it was prettier apparently.
It's quite funny because now you're saying that. I remember different areas my training where you'd have to make sure you build this corner. And the process was to learn how to build. So it's not
It's
wrong.
a discipline.
It's the discipline of understanding
The
how to
direction of
build.
hair, which you would say now.
Yeah, but
or distributing the length in an area.
For no
it's all right. So I'd spend ages building that corner, and at the end it'd be like, but that looks way too heavy. So
Don't
just
get
round
rid
that
of it.
corner.
Just bevel it.
Hang on, what's that? Just round it off. Just round it off a little bit. But it was going back to
the key is the key here, and this is the respect element of it. It is important just to teach people why corners exist, how to build them, and the reason for them, because it is, like you said, a discipline within itself.
we use corners in everyday work in the salon. We need to understand how to create them. And it was more the fact that was in the past, it was like just creating them for the sake of creating them. You know, and not actually understanding where you're putting them, where you're positioning them, if you need them in the first place. Do they look good? I mean, I remember in my training doing barbering, we're talking 20 years ago, it's like create 5 corners, then get rid of
5 corners.
Get rid of 2 of them, and then 3 of them just kind of like half get rid of them. It's like, well, why put them in there in the first place?
Just think about the lengths.
So it's like where the more experience you get, the more you think about choices, the more you think about, okay, time. You know, is it really necessary to do these things? How can I adapt it? Is it? And I think sometimes when you're in a large organisation, there needs to be rules. You know, and it's like that's how we do it. That's how we do it, because you can't make all of them little choices for the scenario.
Also, going back, takes us back to the beginning of this whole video. We were learning a named haircut. We were learning a man's square layer.
Yeah.
So, and that square layer you could put on a woman.
But it's like
different lengths.
But it's like this. At what point do the corners become redundant because they're not sitting anywhere near the head?
Also, when you do build a corner, I mean, in the end, like Kate's, main focus is where does that corner actually sit?
Yeah.
It always sits. Any kind of length always ends up sitting below.
I feel like our discussion is based upon corners.
Yes.
And we're basing it on line, graduation, and layers. Yeah. So let's talk about the present day. Yeah. So as a company, how do we use these words? Are they dirty words?
Ooh.
not dirty words, if they help people visualise things. We just choose not to use them.
Yeah, we will use them very rarely, but as like a reference.
Okay, so give us a scenario when you would use them.
If I'm trying to explain what something's going to look like at the end, I can say to you, for example, it's going to look a bit like a graduation, and instantly you know you've got a visual in your head. Whereas if I start speaking in the terminology that we use now, it would take a while for you to visualise what it is I'm actually.
So it's a shortcut.
It's
a shortcut to visualising the end result. It's not a technique, and it's not something that we prioritise in our education system. So is it in the lecture?
But we took it away from the lecture because we think that sometimes it distracts the student from actually learning the fundamental process of how to
the technique.
To understand, the technique. To understand what's going on in one section, and then the simple question was, okay, well, do I want section 2 to be longer, shorter, or the same length as section number 1? And then how do I repeat that process in order to get the length to sit in the right place when the hair was at natural form?
If you think of Italy, when we were in Italy last week or 2 weeks ago, you talk about our terminology, and then somebody else would go, so it's going to be graduating in the back. You'd be like, the end result will look like that, but this is how you achieve that.
It's like you can't build a car from the outside, from the finished result. You need to go back on the inside, or build anything. So you need to know that systematic process that we're going to put in together.
It's almost like you can name a cake, like a Victoria sponge. Unless you know what you need to make that Victoria sponge, you can't make it. Whereas
so the techniques, mixing it, folding it, baking it, all of these kind of things is the technique. The Victoria
your
sponge.
choices that you make, and then how you use those choices to create the Victoria sponge.
However, it's a bit posh old cafe.
That's insane, isn't it? You go down the shops and get a Vicky sponge. Is it not? That's what happened.
However, even though they were there, they were present, the line, graduation and layering, no one knew the little pieces that they had to use or focus on to execute that.
Because hairdressers are visual people and they want to see a result, and then they want to kind of like try and replicate it.
Yeah, but it was just habits.
Yeah.
It was just moving through a set motion, and a set, or sections were basically the set thing. One way of creating that, in my experience, and there was no full understanding of how to create, and that's what we wanted to move on to.
I was just debating. It was kind of like, okay, well, if this is a graduation and this is what graduation says it is, at what point did it then become a layer? That's what I wanted to know, because at what area of the head are we talking about? Because we need to talk
remember
about
the discussion we had about
if
something's consistent in length all the way through, is that layering or graduation?
Yeah. So for me, it was like, okay.
And also, is that vertically or horizontally we're talking about?
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, well, what part that part of the head? Because at that part of the head it goes flatter than that part of the head, or that part sticks out.
So it became almost irrelevant.
Yeah, because I was like, but they're contradicting each other.
Yeah.
So we're going to get so far down the road of 10 or 15 years, like we did, and it wasn't bad to do that, because like we said.
Okay, let's summarise. Yeah. So in summary, if we go back to our last raw, we've removed square, round and triangular from our vocabulary. Yeah. We still got it as a tool in our pocket if we ever need to use it, but it's not. It's not something that we use.
Focus.
Yeah. And the same with lines, graduation and layering. It's something that we keep it in our repertoire of tools, but it's not a priority in our education system.
And what everyone's going to find out is that some of us, it's easier to let go than others. Just put that in there. Yeah.
Well, I remember when we had to stop using the word.
You, no.
How long did it take you to stop using the word one length and line? It took me like a year and a half, 2 years. Because it's a change.
They're still in there. They're still in there.
They're still in there.
They're still in there.
I haven't called it a one length for a long, long time.
Time.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.